keep hearing this word paradigms, mindsets, perspectives, stories. I've been here, like most of you, since yesterday. These keep coming up. Paradigms, stories, mindsets. Just an activity to explore your own mindset, potentially to change that mindset results in changes and actions in your life. A message that's been clear to me in listening to the speakers and some of the conversations I've had is that if we're going to change the world, we have to start by changing ourselves. Last night I had a conversation with someone about paradigms, and someone kindly and politely said, well, I don't really understand what a paradigm is. It's a new word to me. So I was going to have a planned talk, and I'll share a little bit about my story, about my 4-year, 40-country trip around the world and what the heck that has to do with the ROI of why. But before we get started, I want to start with a reward for those of you who stuck around for the last session. We're going to start with a quiz. So if you have a piece of paper, pull that paper out. Table 4 lines, connect all the dots. Well, we've got one down here. Anybody else? Anybody else? Somebody in back. Okay. Anybody else? Connect all the dots without lifting your pen, pencil, or paper. Okay. So Jay, you said they're the smartest group ever, but I think we got 2 of them. One is your son, so that doesn't count. What's up with the rest of them? Everyone's going to be like, can you just tell us? Can you just get to the point? Okay. So 2 people got it, and maybe somebody has seen this before, so maybe it's 3 people now. So here's the answer. 4 dots, 4 lines, connect all the dots without listing your pen and pencil. Ready? There's 1 line, 2 lines, there's 3 lines, there's 4 lines. Well, that was easy. Why, in a room full of 250 of the smartest people and an online audience of thousands, did only potentially a handful of people get the answer to this question, which now, when you look at it, is stunningly obvious. Anyone want to volunteer the reason why that was so hard? Stayed in the box, okay? So, it would be really unwise of someone like me to start a conference full of creative and innovative and entrepreneurial people who've come from all over the state and are listening around the world, maybe around the country, came all over here and opened my talk with Think Outside the Box. So my message today is not think outside the box. That's obvious, you should do that. The thing you've been told since you were 3. The message is a little different, and it's really the exploration of paradigms. It's not think outside the box. The message is maybe there is no box. Because again, I said, here's some dots, draw some lines. Almost everyone in this room, there's some imaginary boundaries around what you thought was possible. And I never said you couldn't go outside of the box. You created boundaries around what was possible in your mind, and in fact, we do this all the time in life. And a paradigm shift is that feeling when I put the slide up and you're like, I didn't know I could go outside the box. So this conference, this movement, this gathering of folks is really about paradigms. And because we're all at different learning stages in this journey, some of us have been doing it for our entire careers, and some of us, this conference is their first journey into what social impact in business looks like. We have to be patient with each other. And we have to develop shared vocabulary and understanding about some of the words we throw around. And so a paradigm shift is what we're talking about, a paradigm shift in business. I can say that now confidently, but 25 years ago, I was in business school. I was quite young, and I was presented with what seemed like a fundamental pillar of business, this idea by who's been mentioned multiple times, Bill Friedman, in the famed 1970s New York Times publication. World didn't change because he put it in the New York Times, but it uses the marker to really look at when shareholder capitalism really became how we do business in the United States of America, and thus the global world that revolves around capitalism in the United States. Well, honestly, I don't think I actually read the article, I just read this quote, because my business school handbook said that the only purpose of business is to increase shareholder value. I probably, like many of you, look at that statement now and go, really? And I didn't know why it didn't sit right with me, but like you watch the news, you see what companies and corporations, business leaders in our communities do. That aren't quite right. You're like, that doesn't seem quite right. So I decided at 23 years old that didn't seem quite right, but I didn't know what to do about it. So I grew up in North Omaha. My mom is a nurse, my dad is a social worker, and I was raised under the belief that we're supposed to do good in the world. I was young, I was bright-eyed, I was bushy-tailed, like many of the students in this room and many of the older folks in the room. I wanted to change the world, so you can probably relate. Well, I realized very quickly upon my college graduation is that I had a really big problem, which is I wanted to change the world, but I had absolutely no freaking idea how the world worked. I'd mostly spent my entire life in school. I traveled around the U.S., definitely been across Nebraska, but I had never really seen the world, and I thought it was egotistical and arrogant of me to want to change the world without ever having seen it. So I looked around all the ways that you can travel when you're 23 years old, all the students in the room. Here's a list. You join the Peace Corps. You go to China, you can teach English. You can volunteer at an orphanage in Costa Rica. You can backpack across Europe. And I looked at all those things when I was 23 years old, and I was like, there's no way I can pick one of these things. No, I'll just do them all. I'm going to take a trip around the world. Seemed like a pretty good idea. Problem was I didn't have any money, which was also exacerbated by the fact that I owed the federal government about $25,000 in student loans, which, if you think about it, is actually a great reason to leave the country. So I decided I would get a normal job. I would save up money. I would set a goal of 3 years. Save up money like a normal human being, my adult job. Set a deadline of 3 years. So at the age of 26, quit my job, sold everything I owned, would backpack a Virgin passport and one-way ticket to China. I just left. Never left, I never been outside the country in my entire life, and I had lived almost my entire life in the state of Nebraska. The goal was to go around the world for a year, and then coming back 4 years later. I lived, worked, traveled, and volunteered in 40 different countries. The goal was also to see how people live in the world, right? Sounds kind of naive, but I did all the things one would try to do, or one could do, to live like the locals. So I did a bunch of weird things. I lived in a Buddhist temple in Korea. I worked in a dress factory in Bangkok, making dresses for poorly making dresses for 60 cents an hour. I lived on a 500,000-acre cattle ranch in Australia. I lived in a mud hut village in Zambia with a guy who taught me how they farm maize. Saw the world. And I could come up here and tell you a bunch of stories about what I saw. Save that for another time. Because today, what I want to share with you is a couple insights and a couple patterns that I saw over and over and over again, traveling around the world for 4 years through 40 different countries, almost overland for as cheap as possible, that I think will help inform the conversations that we're having first in this room, and then the conversations you're having in the boardrooms, in the business offices, family dining tables, church, the soccer games, about what is it and what direction our world is going to. And why this, the ROI Conference, is an essential and important conversation in moving not only our world forward, but moving our communities, our families, and our own business and professional lives. The biggest thing that I've learned traveling around the world first is that cultural language differences aside, we're all much more similar than we're led to believe. And it's the similarities which keep us connected and the differences which keep it interesting. I think you'll continually hear it, and you have heard as we talk about issues and challenges and social impact in business, that diversity, equity, and inclusion are central to creating an economy and a country and a community where everyone can participate. The biggest lesson, the biggest aha moment that struck me from my trip around the world, and I traveled from 2006 to 2010. Remember about halfway through that, 2008? Everybody remember the financial crisis? I traveled 2 years before that, 2 years after. The biggest aha moment in traveling around the world was the realization that the world has gone through a fundamental shift. The world of our past, the world many of us were born into, has gone through this sort of catastrophic shift. In 2008, 2007 will probably actually be in 50 years from now, the moment we're right in the middle of it now. We're talking about the end of human history, so give or take 10 or 50 years. But what actually happened, give or take 10 or 25 years, starting in about 2008, is that the industrial age actually ended. The industrial age was the way we organized it for 300 years. It started with the advent of the steam engine and a bunch of other ways that we sort of harnessed power. And the industrial age has ended, and we've shifted into this new era, but most people aren't even really aware that that's happened. I don't have to tell you because you're in this room and you've self-selected in this group because you're talking about the important themes of impact in business. But the values that we're talking about today, yesterday, at this conference, in this network, in this movement, are values of the era we're moving into. And in some cases, they're antithetical to the values that drove and organized our society in the industrial age. Earlier, Jay said that he thinks the ethos of the ROI of Y conference is the biggest thing to come into business since the computer. Jay, where you're at, I'm going to respectfully actually disagree. I think you're not thinking big enough. I think that the values, the opportunities, the practices that are being captured by the Do More Good movement are actually much bigger than the computer. Think about it this way. There's a lot of frameworks think about human evolution, but here's one that I like. Think about the evolution of societies, how technology and communication and network tools change the way society lives. So there's a little bit of a cartoon version, literally cartoon version, but this gets the gist of the idea across. That humans originated in hunter-gatherer societies, eventually organized into farming and agriculture states, like this is the history of the state of Nebraska. And then somewhere, depending on the country and where you're thinking about, we move from the agrarian society to an industrial age. Just one way to think about how big and what that would have felt like right here in Nebraska in 1880, 85% of people lived on farms. By 1920, 80% of people lived in cities. Think of all the things that changed. Some of your parents, some of your grandparents lived through that. And what I think is happening when I saw the product for 4 years to 40 different countries is that we're actually shifting out of the industrial age, which valued a bunch of great things that gave us the middle class in the United States, helped a lot of other countries and cultures and communities develop and created all the wonderful technology and things we have. We're shifting into an era that has a different set of values, a different set of paradigms. Because we're sort of just getting into it, there really isn't a name for it. So I'm going to make one up. I'm actually going to borrow it from the author Seth Godin. I'm going to call it Connected Age. There are a lot of other names for it: the Industrial Revolution, the Knowledge Age, the Networked Age. There's a bunch of them. This is not my theory. This is sort of widely discussed, as I'm sure many of you know. And a lot of the literature is, what are we moving into? But for today, because we need a word, I'm going to call it the Connected Age. There really isn't a consensus on a word, so maybe next year at this conference we could all agree to come up with a name, and then we'll just call it that, and then everyone will be like, yeah, Nebraska in 2024, they came up with the name of the thing that followed the industrial age. So what I want to share with you is 4 patterns, 4 patterns traveling around the world for 40 years in 40 different countries that are relevant to the conversation today at this conference, and I think relevant to the future of the communities in which you live. So the first pattern we saw over and over again, 40 different countries, 4 years, is that entrepreneurship and innovation. If you have an idea of the thing that you want to create, the tools available and the connections you have, especially if you're connected to the internet, the barriers to entry to starting and growing your entrepreneurship, innovative, creative ideas have just collapsed. Now, it's still very hard to turn it into a giant, successful enterprise, but the barriers to entry have basically collapsed. You can start a business as long as you have connections to the internet, with very little investment, very little sort of physical things. And in fact, if someone really wanted to, we'd probably start a business right now and be done by the time my speech is done. The second pattern I saw traveling through 40 different countries over 4 years is the notion that the individual has been globalized. And here's what I mean by that. In the industrial age, corporations were globalized, meaning a corporation, a company, an entity could get all the resources and all the people they needed from anywhere in the world, gather them together, reorganize them, and turn them into some sort of creation or output or product or service that they could sell, give away, gift, rent, share with the world. In the connected age, this right has been afforded to nearly every individual. The third pattern I saw over and over and over again, and this is going to seem a little far out from our conversations today. I'm sure you can see how these two are relevant, but this third one is a little far out, but trust me, it underpins a lot of how you are going to take what you gain here and actually put it into action. It's this notion that networks are replacing hierarchies. Hierarchies are the structure of top-down management in corporate America. Is an age-old way of organizing for humans. It goes back to religion and the priests and the gods. But in the connected age, because of the technology and the exponential increase in connectivity, we're seeing the rise of networks over traditional hierarchies. You know what I'm talking about? Think of every industry that's had issues or collapsed, especially let's go back to banking in 2008. Let's look at one of the largest hierarchies in the US, the federal government. Not functioning super well in a lot of ways. Social media, which are networks, where we're taking traditional media, which are hierarchies. And the people that will succeed in the 21st century in communities and making a difference and making a change and making an impact are organizing a network. The good news is that we're here, and I think movement is just another fancy word for a network with a purpose. The fourth pattern I see over and over again, traveling around the world for 40 years in 40 different countries, that is exceptionally relevant to this conversation today, and very affirming to a young, aspiring social entrepreneur 15 years ago, is the rise of social entrepreneurship and social enterprise. So again, I want to make sure that for those of you who see those words and are like, I don't know what that means, again, have to remember we've got to keep an open and inclusive tent to welcome people. And so I'm going to take a second, I'm going to explain social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, understanding that some of you in the room are literally the nation's experts. But social entrepreneurship, as opposed to more traditional entrepreneurship, which I don't even know what that really means, and social enterprise, are a different paradigm to think about business. We've talked a little bit about them, we've sort of hinted around social entrepreneurship. We've talked about the 4 frameworks and the Do More Good movement. I don't think this is a 5th framework. I think social entrepreneurship is the thread that strings together across all of the 4 frameworks used in this movement. But typical business, and I'm, again, cartoon version, sort of simple, oversimple here to make my point, is that traditional business has a single bottom line. Back to the whole Milton Friedman. Entire purpose of business is to make money for the shareholder, period. Didn't sit right with me 23 years ago, still doesn't sit right with me today. Spent the last 23 years playing around with this idea to be like, I think I can show him there's another way to do it. What I discovered in traveling around the world is that I was not the only one with this aspiration. In fact, there were millions of people, social entrepreneurs, whether they call themselves or not, who decided that the structure of business could look a little different. A social enterprise can have, 3 bottom lines is a simple way to say it. I've heard people talk about 5 bottom lines. But how does your business impact the people, both in and outside of the business, the stakeholders, the planet, the environment, and obviously make a profit? The trick, and this is why social entrepreneurship is actually harder than standard entrepreneurship, you got to balance those 3 things as you're trying to build and maintain and grow your business. But that's why we're here, and I was so thrilled to accept Graham and Jay's invitation to come, because this model, this way of thinking about business isn't a fringe idea. It's happening everywhere in the world, in every country, in every culture. Now, it manifests in different ways. It's happening right here in Nebraska, Midwest, the United States. It's happening in Rwanda, Indonesia, Hong Kong, Sweden. Social entrepreneurship, which is a related concept, which for today's purposes, I'm just going to say it's the person who tries to tries to solve social problems using entrepreneurial business skills. Social entrepreneurship has been around forever. The word kind of got popular in the 1980s. There's still pretty much no consensus on what the actual definition is. Social entrepreneurship is using business and entrepreneurial skill to try to solve social problems. We're getting lots of debates, maybe in future sessions, about the nuance of that discussion, but for today, I'm just going to use this high-level discussion. I need some examples, Andy. That's what a couple of you are thinking. So start with the one that everyone probably knows. You go to Target, buy yourself some 7th generation detergent, 7th generation based in Vermont. probably about a 25-year-old company. Total fringe idea when it was started in like 1993. But the idea that you could have cleaning products that actually were thoughtful at their impact after they clean. This business, I think, was eventually sold to Unilever for like $300, $400 million, and is now part of Unilever. Anybody from Omaha? Anybody know Carmen Tapio? My favorite social entrepreneurs here in Nebraska. Spent an entire career in teleservices, Omaha, capital of call centers, or maybe previously, that's the old paradigm. We said that old paradigm. Call centers in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. I don't know, maybe it was called lots of call centers. Weston Teleservices was a business she started. It's a for-profit teleservices, outsourced teleservice call center business, but it's based and rooted in her community in North Omaha, which is a traditional Black community in Omaha. And her goal of the company is to deliver excellent and extraordinary teleservices support while creating jobs, making a great place for people to work, and creating wealth and well-being in her community. Carmen's super impressive. Some of you have some Stonyfield organic yogurt. You can guess where that one's going. I just put that there because I think you've seen that brand probably at the store. Anybody who spends time overseas probably knows M-Pesa. It's actually a Vodafone company. The idea of using cell phones to move money. This is a good example of sometimes called intrapreneurship, which is entrepreneurship inside a large existing company. There's lots of social entrepreneurs who led the pathway so that Vodafone could do that by, for those of you maybe who spent time after maybe 10, 20 years ago, people were doing it in the informal economy, moving money with cell phone credits, and then Vodafone was like, there might be a business here. Probably someone in this room could tell that story better, but that's my version of my experience with it, primarily spending time in Zambia and Tanzania. We heard yesterday about impact investing. Venture capitalists whose entire goal isn't just to get more money, but to think about the impact. Ignia, Mexico-based venture capital company who invests in services and technologies and companies that help the growing middle class in Mexico. Huge growing market, also plenty of opportunity to make some money. Anybody from Colombia, Medellin? EPM. EPM is actually the water, sanitation, and electric company for the city of Medellin, Colombia. The thing that's wild about this, about EPM, is EPM actually doesn't just do the water, sanitation, and garbage for Medellin, a very innovative city in Colombia, which 30 years ago was the home of Pablo Escobar, called the most dangerous city in the world. EPM actually runs the water, sanitation, energy, and a couple other things for something like 17 other municipalities in South America, and is recently expanding to the United States. With all the profits they make, which is in the hundreds of billions of dollars managing those services, I was told that they pay for half of the city budget of the city of Medellin. It is owned by the city. It's a social enterprise that ultimately benefits the community in which it's formed. Anybody cook? Anybody know Frontier Co-op? Your organic spices at your Sprouts and sometimes at Whole Foods? They're over in Norway, Iowa, population like 700, one of the largest suppliers of organic herbs and spices, thoughtfully sourced from around the world. And then last, one of my favorite social entrepreneurs who get up to Minneapolis, Jackie Berglund. What an inspiration. It is the only beer company in America that spends 100% of the money it makes to give food to the people who need it. They don't make half-assed beer either. It's excellent beer. If you find yourself in downtown Minneapolis, go to the Finnegan's Brewery. Excellent food, excellent beer, and know that for every beer you buy, you're funding the Finnovation Center, which is Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center for social entrepreneurs on the top floor of Finnegan's Brewery. What I want to how I want to land this presentation, to kind of bring it back to where I started, is that what I saw traveling around the world for 4 years in 40 different countries is that many of today's crises stem from people operating on an outdated worldview. I'll say that again. Many of today's crises stem from people operating in an outdated worldview. Building on the last exercise we just did, people might even be operating on an outdated personal view. That's why I think it's incredibly important throughout the activities of this conference. We're not just talking about these high-minded, idealistic, let's change the world ideas, but we're grounding it in who you are, who I am, who we are together, and making sure that the frameworks, the mindsets, the paradigms, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are sorted. Because if they're not sorted, when you go out to change the world, and I've seen this both in my own work and work of other social entrepreneurs, is that if you don't have that sorted, your projects actually propagate and further issues of negative issues, inequality, sort of fiefdoms, ego. So what I'm so proud of this conversation, mini business conversation, we need to spend so much time on me, not us, and giving you that space and time, but recognizing that part of you, especially who are early in this journey, that may be the first step. Who am I? What do I care about? What's important to me? But we're going to take that up to the higher level now. We're going to say, what are the outdated worldviews that I saw traveling around the world that might be relevant today? So I'm going to give you 3 of them. They're not new. It's not the first time you've heard them. In fact, I pulled them from all the conversations I've been having for the last 2 days. So we're going to revisit them, and I'm going to try to add a little bit of color. And then I'm going to wrap up and show a little short video, and then we'll be out of here. So here are 3 persistent myths from an outdated worldview, view of the industrial age, that I've heard talked about. Not necessarily in these words. I tried to make it simple, and I was trying to get it on one slide to make it clear. So the first we talked about, Milton Friedman. He didn't create this, he just articulated it clearly. And then he got on a talk show circuit and popularized it. But the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. That has been the predominant way of thinking in business schools across America and by sort of extension, sort of Western and capitalistic-oriented business schools. The second one is that change happens because individual heroes do heroic things. And the third is that entrepreneurs wear flip-flops and live in Silicon Valley. So in the last 5 minutes here, I'm going to convince you that none of these are actually true. So the first, social responsibility business increases profits. Well, if you weren't listening for the last 2 days, you're going to get a big fight with me. If you've been listening for the last 2 days, I don't really need to say anything. Because what is clear from the Do More Good movement is that profits and purpose can coexist. So let me just give you 2 little bits of color. As I go through this presentation, I don't have time, I have about 20 minutes to talk, so I threw some resources in the lower left-hand corner. I'm going to give you a list at the end, like if you want to follow up. Read more, I don't have time to go into these really deep. A good friend of mine, Ross Baird, co-founder, CEO, former CEO actually, of Village Capital, which is one of the first impact investing companies in the world, wrote a great book called The Innovation Blind Spots. And one of the ideas he brings up in the Innovation Blind Spot is the notion of 2-pocket thinking. It's the predominant way we think as a society and individuals and corporations about how the world works. And the way that works is in my make money pocket, I have a business. And in my do good pocket, I take the money I make from my business and my life and I donate it. And that 2-pocket thinking exists at every level of our economy. The businesses, that individuals, the families think, in order to do good, I have to make money in my make money pocket. And whatever I do in my make money pocket, even if it contradicts the do good pocket, it doesn't matter because I'll have more money here that I can then put in the do good pocket. And what Ross argues in his book is that is a blind spot. And again, if you've been listening to anything that's been said over the last 2 days, that the blind spot is you can actually make more money and have a positive social impact when you do 1-pocket thinking. Where you're making money activity and you're doing good money aren't contradictory to each other. I think about a couple different, the Standard Oil Foundation, which is the Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller Foundation made all its money from Standard Oil and selling gas and oil. And the foundation was spending money on addressing climate change. And it was investing money in Standard Oil, what is Standard Oil today, whatever that company is today, even though the making money side of the foundation was contradicting the stopping climate change side of it. And eventually, the Rockefeller Foundation pulled out of investing in fossil fuels. That's going from 2-pocket thinking to 1-pocket. The second thing, people also say to me sometimes when I talk about entrepreneurs, hey, I want to make a bunch of money. That's the point. That's not an entrepreneur. That's what I want to do. I can't make a bunch of money and do good. But let me just show you a rudimentary assessment of just 3 markets that have significant challenges and have come up in the last couple of days in our conversations about business and doing good. The 3 markets on the left are basically the total market in education, energy, and healthcare. Lots of issues, lots of challenges, lots of opportunities for our society. That's how much money just in the United States, Sorry to internationalize, that's just the United States. How much money got spent in 2021? And just also remember there's like a pandemic in there, so those numbers might be kind of weird. The market on the right is the global, the entire amount of money that is spent on apps in the world. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are out there trying to build apps, trying to capture markets to make money. If my only goal was to make money, I think I'd go after the three bigger targets. The opportunity to do good in pursuing those markets is immense, as we heard even just a couple of examples we heard today. So this notion that the social responsibility is just to make a bunch of money isn't necessarily true. And yeah, pay attention. Business can pursue purpose and profits, and in the connected age, this is going to become the dominant way of thinking. In his book, Ross says that in 20 to 30 years, he believes one pocket thinking will be the status quo. The second sort of outdated mental model I want to throw at you is this. Change happens because individual heroes do heroic things. Now, I don't know why everybody thinks that individuals are going to save the planet and why it takes one super powerful, strong person, particularly in a mask with a cape, to save the world. But if you watch enough of those movies over time, you start believing the only person who can save us is the Black Panther. And I understand you consciously don't believe that those are real characters. But if you watch enough movies, you start to believe that it's heroic people doing heroic things that change the world. I spent 20 years of my life studying how do you build more intentional communities that support entrepreneurship, innovation, creativity, and new ideas. And what all the research tells you is those are fictional movies, not documentaries. That the idea that a lone individual locked in a garage somewhere in a basement comes up with a formula that changes the world and goes, aha! And then it just changes the world. Or that Martin Luther King got up one morning and was like, well, I think there's problems in our economy. He made a speech. Boom! The world changed. I know you don't consciously think that, but the cartoon models that we have in our mind of how change happens is that that's how it works. And both of those are untrue. I don't want to get into the research right now. We don't have the time. I also want to wrap up. So I'm going to, one of my mentors, Margaret Wheatley, is a great author on how change happens in communities, puts it this way. The world doesn't change one person at a time. It changes as networks of relationships from among people who discover they share a common cause and vision for what's possible. Not one individual, not one organization, not one company, not one person in this room can solve the water crisis in Nebraska, in the world. Not one company, not one individual, not one corporation, not one governor can solve the child care challenges in Lincoln, Nebraska. You heard it this morning. You've got to work together. If you want to go change the world, you need to get a squad. You need to get a crew. And we heard that again and again in some of the talks today. So again, change doesn't happen because individual heroes do heroic things. Assuming there are heroes. I'm not saying there aren't heroes. I'm just saying they're not solely responsible, but it's nice when you tell a story to just like write it in a movie. It's easier if there's one hero, right? But change happens when diverse networks of people come together. The more diverse, the more creative, the more innovative. The third mindset I want to address is someone in this room shut me off and is now on the phone because I said entrepreneurship about 10 minutes ago, and you thought, oh, I'm not an entrepreneur. This isn't for me. Because again, the dominant belief paradigm, sort of caricature at this point, is that entrepreneurs wear flip-flops and live inside Silicon Valley. That this is what many of us believe. Again, I understand you consciously recognize there's entrepreneurs in Nebraska. But again, the stories, the paradigms we hold in our head, the things that frame how we organize, how we work, the stories we tell, think that entrepreneurship looks like this. This is an HBO fictional show for those who are not up on your HBO. The reality is, all the research says that's not the reality at all. That entrepreneurs look like this. The average age of an entrepreneur in America, anyone want to guess? 52, 35, it's 43. 43. It's the fastest growing demographic, sort of racial and gender demographic of entrepreneurship in America. Black women. It's the fastest growing number of small businesses by race in America? Like what culture, race is, sort of a blurry gray line, but culture and race has the most, starting most small businesses? Hispanic and Latino entrepreneurs. All of us are entrepreneurs. What I love, and I see my friend up here, Scott, then Motion, a guru of entrepreneurship here in Nebraska. Scott wants to talk to you about how to turn ideas into reality in Nebraska in Motion. Scott and I agree on this definition, that entrepreneurship, you don't have to look like a certain type of person or come from a particular background, because this definition of entrepreneurship, which I love, is that entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard for resources currently controlled. You don't have all the things you need to make the changes you want. You laugh because you agree, right? A bunch of you are like, yeah, I know what that feels like. Some of you might have your own enterprise or business or small business or tech startup or social enterprise. You might work in government. You might work in nonprofits. If you are pursuing an opportunity you see and you don't have all the things you need, but you're like, you know what? I'll figure it out. It's entrepreneurship. And so if I asked at the beginning of this how many people thought you were social entrepreneurs, like I should have done, I think about a third of you raised your hand. But I hope if you leave with one thing in mind as you leave today, is that you too are an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, if you believe in the do more good movement. So again, yes, there are entrepreneurs in flip-flops in Silicon Valley, and yes, that TV show is really funny, and is sort of making fun of an actual thing that's going on. But entrepreneurs exist everywhere, and they can be anyone, perhaps you. So as we looked at these three ideas, these are what I've heard listening to the sessions over the last 2 days. These are updated worldviews for a new era. Some of them are very in conflict with the values of the old era, and that's why it makes it difficult to have some of these conversations back at home or back at your business. But I want to bring it back to Milton Friedman because he got the first thing wrong, that the only purpose of business is to make money, but he got it right with this. Actual quote from Milton Friedman: "Only a crisis, actually or perceived, produces real change. When the crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on ideas that are lying around." The notion of impact and business going hand in hand, and capitalism and social innovation going hand in hand, has actually been around for a long time, back to before there were computers, back to before there was technology, the internet. But the hyper-connectivity and the access to technology has made these ideas go viral. But the only way we implement these ideas, people like you, the entrepreneurs, the change makers, the do-gooders, the do-more-gooders, are the people who have to help get these ideas in the brains of the people in the community, the people you work with in the communities in which you live. These alternative solutions have been laying around, and thanks to the good folks behind this movement, they've begun to gather not only the resources, but the people together. There's a whole movement called the New Economy Movement, if you're interested in why standard capitalistic or neoclassical economics doesn't seem to be working for all of us. There's a whole movement of people, maybe you've heard of dominant economics, maybe you've heard of stakeholder economics, and there's a whole field of people around the world thinking about how this works. And we've got to connect the movements there, with the movements with the folks on the online audience, with the communities that are working right here in Nebraska. But the way those connections happen isn't because Graham and David are going to call them, it's because you make those connections. We build networks, connect together with people who care about the things that we all believe in. We align our personal values, our personal beliefs, our change statements, the wish we want to see with each other. And as I learned in Amanda's session today, there are entire networks and ecosystems of support in Nebraska that extend well to the globe, but we've got to embed ourselves within those networks to make the changes we want, because one individual, one organization, one company can't change the world, but together there's nothing we can't do. If you think this is an isolated event, if you think this is just, hey, a group in Nebraska and online got together and started talking about this, I wanted to bring to your attention the Institute for the Future, which is a think tank out of San Francisco, who has been writing about and thinking about and studying the future for the last 60 years. Every year they put out a 10-year forecast. What are the core ideas that are going to shape society in the next 10 years? This is the appreciative inquiry question they put on the front of that report. What if we could build a more equitable world by building more equitable enterprises, ways of creating value and generating community wealth and well-being? We've got to connect their movement with the Do More Good movement, with the new economics movement, with the social entrepreneur movement, for the B Corps, the benefit corps. But again, that doesn't happen unless we react. The future is us, ours to create. There are ideas 80 years ago that seemed sort of absurd, that would never, seem like they'd ever come to pass. And you remember when we thought it was a good idea to smoke on airplanes? We're concerned now. That was a mile at a time. Remember 100 years ago? We thought women didn't even vote? What were we thinking? But we believe that. Women should vote. That's a crazy idea. 500 years ago, we were like, oh, yeah, the world is flat. It's totally flat. Everyone agrees it's flat. The advancement of society is new paradigms, new stories, new frameworks, and new mindsets come in, and it's up to us to help spread this. I want to thank Graham and Jay and the team, Do More Good, for setting up this environment for us to come together on this platform. And I hope you continue to find ways to engage with it and on that platform with each other. I'm going to leave you with one video, take it up when the video is done, and then I'll hang around here if anyone else wants to talk. But I really appreciate you at the end of this conference, time to listen to my story. Thank you very much, and we'll watch this video.
As Andy just said, it takes all of our collective action to be able to continue to push this forward. And we are so grateful that each of you are here, a part of this, recognizing the importance of this work, and having this emanate from the middle of Elmhurst.
And we also just want to give a few action items as we're getting ready to part ways here today. We had registrants, about 450 registrants from all over the world, 38 countries, 50 states. The live stream, for those of you that are still watching on the live stream, thank you for joining us for this important event. It's been incredible to have you here. We also want to say, with so much gratitude, thank you to our founding board of advisors, Kate, Jay, Rand, and Frida, for supporting us and the movement and the work that we're doing, and to our entire team. We have a large group of volunteers here today, the production team that helped create the event, and the volunteers. In fact, I know that most of them, if not all of them, are here. If you're one of the volunteers that helped put the event on, could you please stand up so we can give you some applause? I want to give special acknowledgments to just a couple of people that have done a lot of work. If you've seen the guy with lots of tats floating around today, his name is Drew Tucson. He is an amazing human that has done so much work for this movement over the last 3 years, all the way since 2019. And Michaela, would you please come down and accept a little gift on our behalf? Michaela Scheinbeck, who I introduced on day one as the Queen Empress of the Do More Good movement. In particular, has done so much work. Thank you, Michaela. We love you and we appreciate you so much. Okay, here's the call to action. I shared a little bit about this for those of you who were here for our opening yesterday. So many things. The first thing that I want to mention, in the last page of the guidebook, if you're here in our physically present audience, there is a sheet. We would really appreciate if you would take a moment to fill that out, give us some input and feedback. Questions are posed there. You can either leave that, tear it out of the back page, and leave it where you are, or you can drop it off at the registration desk on your way out, either way. And I also want to remind you, if you're here in the audience, if you haven't seen it already, we have a station set up in the back as you're exiting the auditorium at the top and back in the far right corner. If you would be so kind as to consider stopping by and giving us 30 seconds, 1 minute, talking about things that you're inspired by the outcome of being here and this movement in general, we would greatly appreciate it. We would be able to use those testimonials and videos as we do everything within our power to fill whatever auditorium we're going to be in here next year, and to increase our audience and to get this message in front of more people. If you're with the virtual audience, please send us a note at hello@domoregood.com. Also, I wanted to remind you that we are in the process of working on constructing a cohort of leaders, anywhere from 20 to 30 individuals that will be part of the first Fellows cohort of the Do More Good movement. If you're interested in any way in being involved in that discussion, please send us an email at hello@domoregood.com and indicate your interest, and we will reach out to you, and we're going to set up some strategic planning sessions. We would love to have your input as we are considering how to structure that cohort and take it to the next level. And next year, our conference will be held April 10th and 11th here in the middle of everywhere, Lincoln, Nebraska. And we want to remind those that are here representing or with businesses and companies, becoming a partner is the #1 way you can support the movement. This is our primary methodology for sustaining the organization long-term and for growing and expanding the work that we do across the country and across the world. You can become either an individual partner for $250 or an organizational partner for $500. And we're offering a special discount at this week only. This actually expires on Friday. But if you become an individual partner for $199, we're discounting it just for this week. It will include a full ticket to next year's event as well. We would be deeply appreciative for your support on that. And the first 250 organizational partners supporting the movement will be permanently enshrined in the Do More Good movement as the founding partners of the movement. And to that end, I want to thank the 3 partners that joined yesterday. Aquatics Swimming School in Miami, one of our virtual attendees, the Alec U team, a virtual attendee in California, and Bloom Growth, who has a large contingent of folks here today. Thank you to those 3 companies, and we encourage any and all of you to do whatever you can to help support us moving forward. We're going to finish with this. I challenged you yesterday when we started the event to come up with one thing that you're going to do differently tomorrow, next week, moving forward, that maybe you weren't thinking about before you walked through these doors yesterday. And I'm encouraging you to think about that, spread the word, take this message. Our mission to empower, enable, and inspire business leaders around the world and their companies to become the best possible versions of themselves and to serve all of the stakeholders of that organization is something that we believe is is worthy of changing the world and worthy of investing in. And we are looking forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Graham. I love you. You're amazing. I appreciate you so much. Have a fabulous afternoon. Go take on the day.